Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. Will you please stand? Good evening. Love the party here. Can you please rise as we welcome the procession inside the venue? Thank you. Please be seated.
Good evening, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this inaugural address by Professor Janis van der Westhuizen. A particular welcome to the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Teaching and Learning and Rector-Designate, Professor Daresh Ramjuganath. Thank you for representing the Rectorate here this evening. I further acknowledge and welcome the other members of the academic procession, Professor Nicola de Jager from the Chair of the Department of Political Science, Professor Scarlett Cornelissen, also from the department, and of course the person of the hour, Professor Janis van der Westhuizen. It is an honor to introduce this valued colleague in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. We are here not only to recognize his contributions in the field of political science, but also to celebrate the person behind the title, one who has consistently demonstrated a passion for both research and teaching. Professor van der Westhuizen's research career has focused on global political economy, state power, and international relations, particularly on how middle-income countries such as South Africa and Brazil navigate the complexities of global competition and influence. His research sheds light on how nations seek to establish themselves on the international stage, often confronting the constraints imposed by larger global players. At Stellenbosch University, Professor van der Westhuizen's work has influenced the curriculum, making political studies, political science, not just an exploration of theory, but a reflection on real-world implications that affect us all. His ability to bridge the local and global and to connect theory with practice has inspired generations of students to think critically about the political forces shaping our world. He has written books on globalization in Malaysia and South Africa, democratizing South Africa's foreign policy and South Africa's multilateral diplomacy and global change. And he has produced an impressive list and range of academic articles and research reports on comparative politics, political economy, and international relations. On top of this, he has amassed an equally impressive list of fellowships and awards. Professor van der Westhuizen's work on the intersection of politics and economics has also found traction beyond academia, to include policymakers and the broader public, especially through his engagements in the media. He is not only known and valued for his scholarly contributions, but also for his compassion for his students. He has mentored countless students, guiding them through the complexities of political analysis, always ensuring that their voices are heard and their ideas nurtured. His open-door policy and approachable demeanor have created an environment in which intellectual curiosity can emerge and thrive. When I asked Professor van der Westhuizen, or Janis, to us in the faculty, how would you like to be introduced this evening, he didn't mention any of the things I've just said. Instead, he suggested that I tell you that he is actually an accidental academic. After his honors at the old Randse Afrikaanse Universiteit, now UJ, he hoped to be selected for the cadet program at Foreign Affairs, but he didn't pass the interview. And so, as one does, he decided to come to Stellenbosch in 1992 to do his master's. At the time, there was an emerging cottage industry around negotiations as South Africa was embarking on the path to democratization. Janis's plan was for the Masters to become a launching pad for a career in negotiations and dispute resolution. But fate intervened once again when he received a scholarship to do his PhD at Dalhousie University in Canada, and in an entirely different subfield to boot. In his research for the PhD, he worked on South Africa's foreign policy, and since then, he has increasingly worked on the so-called emerging powers, notably South Africa and Brazil, that I've just mentioned. He's also taught a third-year class in comparative politics for several years, with a focus on the similarities and differences between the political economies of South Africa and Brazil, and he regularly supervises master's and PhD students on this topic. As we gather here today, we don't only celebrate Professor van Westhuizen's past accomplishments, but look forward to the continued impact of his research, teaching, and mentorship in the years to come. Please join me in welcoming Professor Janis van Westhuizen to the podium.
Thank you, Fasti. That was a particularly generous. I was like, who's she talking about there? But thank you very much. Professor Ramkutinat, colleagues, friends, as many of you know, an academic career is a very long and a lonely one. And the only way you can survive it is by the fellow travelers that you engage on this long journey. And so I wanted to mention three groups of fellow travelers on the journey. And I'm not going to mention really anybody by name, but more clusters of people. And the first, of course, is my colleagues. So when they start telling you about this journey you have to reflect on for this inaugural lecture, you invariably start thinking about the years. So it's a kind of a dangerous exercise. And I realized I started teaching here in 2002, which is over 20 years. And then I thought to myself, yeah, but wait, if you add the years when you started here as a master's student, it gives us 32 years. Yubi's nodding. So it's wonderful for me to be able to have all colleagues here in the room and online, some I've known for 32 years. And I won't mention you by name, but you know who you are. The other group are groups of old friends who are also here, some of whom I've also known for nearly 20 years. And then I wanted to especially thank my brother and Kati and Micah, who came all the way from McGregor, all the way just to come and see me in my Harry Potter outfit. So I will thank them too. Okay. So let me get going. So I was struggling, how do I start with this whole big thing? It's such a huge concept. And I thought, let me just start from, I'm just going to jump in. And because a lot of this stuff is on the news, I'm sure people will get the gist of where I'm going as we get going. And I wanted to start with a speech that was made by the Kenyan ambassador to the UN, February 22. And in this speech, essentially, in reaction to, this is of course in the reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, he essentially castigated Putin, and he said, if African states who have been forced to live with colonial borders on them for many, many years, why cannot Russia do the same? You know? And this speech triggered quite some traction in the media. It was very odd for an African leader to make those kind of comments. Okay, and in the West, people kind of saw this as some kind of Kenya signaling that it supports the Western position. And there's a great book that came out just late last year by Samuel Ramani called Russia and Africa. And Ramani makes this great point about this, and he says, the Kenyan ambassador never intended to signal that Kenya wants to be seen as part of the West. What Kenya wanted to signal was that the world needs to support international law and the multilateral order with all its faults and all its problems. And so we see the emergence of a third voice coming out of this. With the effects of the Ukraine war, we see more and more countries in the global south taking a position neither towards the global west or towards the global east. So I wanted to, where's my next slide, mention here the tremendous variety that we're going to see in this new coming order. And there's a discussion at the moment. People are wondering, okay, is the non-alignment idea coming back to life again? There's multiple discussions on what's non-alignment. Some people say we're entering a period of multi-alignment. The economist in this article talks about the transactional 25 countries that refuse to impose sanctions on Russia, who said, no, we do not want to be part of either the global north or the global east and the global west. But we see there's clearly something in the water, some way in which a third grouping is going to emerge. And the big question is how is this going to look like? I don't think we're going to see a Cold War 2.0. In fact, what we see at the moment are not cold wars, but very hot wars happening. And one interesting concept that I came across was it last year? Eikenberry wrote a very interesting paper in International Affairs. And Eikenberry says he thinks the world order is going to be something like three worlds. He calls it the three worlds. And he says these three worlds, very broadly conceived, is going to be three clusters. It's going to be the global west, a global east, and a global south. And I'm particularly interested here in the global south and the group of countries that people call global swing states. Okay? And in this group of global swing states, we have a number of countries that might happen to start to become critical interlocutors between these worlds. Okay? And we can start to see, for example, a country like Turkey, the interesting position Turkey is playing. If Turkey does become a member of another enlargement of the BRICS, we're actually going to see a member of NATO in the BRICS formation, okay? And as you know, Turkey's been very important in grain deals sorted to get grain out of Ukraine at the beginning of the war. And we can see also some of these global swing states, South Africa, Turkey, Brazil, and now recently India, have all been trying to make some kind of a mediation or efforts to create peace between Russia and Ukraine. So already we're starting to see some little signs of these global swing states starting to connect these parts of the three worlds. Let me go to my next slide. So I thought, before I get going, to just give you a little overview, a menu of what we'll be having today. So for starters, I'm quickly going to tell you what are global swing states, just a quick definition. Our main course, and this is where I really want to focus my talk, is about the issue of domestic stakeholders and non-alignment. I'm very interested in how do the people living in countries, how does the domestic, the civil society, how do they view non-alignment? And what I want to do, and I must do this before I get into the detail and forget to tell you what the point I want to show, I'll give you two short case studies where I'm hoping to show you that civil society responded when the political executive into global swing states tilted too much to either side. Okay, and my two case studies, well, no surprises which case studies these are. The first one will be Brazil, and the second one will be South Africa. Okay, And what I'm hoping to show to you that I think civil society can play a key role in holding the political executive accountable when they tend to have political ambitions that are too out of the way. And then we'll end up hopefully with a conclusion and some policy implications. And I put a little picture there of Erdogan. So in case you wondered, where did he get this title from? The world is bigger than five. That world is bigger than five is kind of a rallying call that's been associated with Erdogan. And and I hear this week when we had the UN meetings, just going on this week about countries with global south complaining again about the 80-year-old debate about why is the UN Security Council still reflecting the structure of global power as it was in 1945? Why is it still the P5 that control the UN system when the world is much bigger than five, as Erdogan indicated? Okay. So, what is a global swing state? So, Kilman wrote the first article in 2012, and it kind of disappeared. Nobody spoke about swing states. And then the last year, suddenly swing states is coming up. The president of Finland wrote an article the other day in The Economist talking about the swing state. Even Goldman Sachs sent an advisory out to its clients the other day and used the concept of a swing state. So after UK, the swing state idea is on the agenda again. So Kilman basically said, well, he draws it from the American model of the swing states in the US, right? They can either go Democrat or Republican. They're secondly, geopolitically quite strategic. Thirdly, they're large and growing economies. Fourth, they're diplomatically significant. They've got very vast networks of diplomacy. And fourthly, they're neither fully embraced by fully embrace the liberal order, nor do they reject it. Okay, and the liberal order just simply means the system of global governance post 1945 that's largely shaped by the US and the Western powers. If you don't know, so I want to quickly give you a couple of slides, so I can just go grab a sip of water, and I'm going to give you a couple of slides on what these examples of what these swing states are. So as you can, and it's from a very great, very useful report by the Carnegie Endowment. They prefer the term emerging powers. And as you can see, they identify 10. Now the literature isn't in agreement on who the swing states are. The original 4, like what Kilman spoke about, was Brazil, India, Turkey, and Indonesia. Interestingly, all democracies. But if you look there, they've also included Saudi Arabia now. Okay. So it's an interesting group of countries. And this Carnegie report has a number of interesting details that I'm quickly going to just show you just to give you a little bit of the context. The first is their share of global GDP, 32%, global population, share of global GDP, 20%, share of the global south, so this is just the global south, 56% of the global south's population, 49% of the global south's GDP. If you look at the economic projections, you can see the very powerful role India is going to play. Argentina, South Africa there at the bottom. In population, again, India, very important, Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil, Mexico, Turkey, Thailand, Argentina, Saudi Arabia. And then, did I skip one? No, I got them all. Okay. So, a little bit of conceptual clarification. What's the connection between global swing states and non-alignment? Okay. I started getting interested in this concept of global swing states because it seems very clear to us that there's some third role, some third voice that's going to become very important in global order. Probably it's going to be a form of non-alignment, but I think we should not think of this third voice with the same kind of ideological baggage that we associate with the old non-aligned movement. I think the world's going to be much more complex, much more volatile, but there's still going to be some third position as it were. And I thought, and I like this global swing state idea just as a way of getting us out of that ideological straitjacket of the 1960s, 60s, and 70s. That was the first reason. The second reason was that in this country, in some quarters, and you will know which quarters soon, there's a tendency to associate the idea of non-alignment with anti-imperialism. And that's not necessarily the case everywhere. And I think we should kind of do away with that kind of baggage that prevents us thinking in more innovative ways. And what I want us to think very importantly about the global swing states and non-alignment is think of it more of a strategy as how can a country position itself to make the most out of the opportunities, the problems, and the challenges that this global order is going to impose. And so, for the purpose of this lecture, I just thought it will be useful to conceptualize it as thinking of global swing states as an outcome, but the role they take on to get there is non-alignment. So I just wanted to make the link between non-alignment and global swing states. You'll see in the literature, people tend to cluster other terms with global swing states. The more established terms are middle powers, emerging powers, but I'm not going to go into all the semantics for the purpose of that right now. So this gets me then to the main course, where I'm really interested in, and this is this rethinking of non-alignment. And what I noticed in the literature is that the literature tends to see non-alignment as something that the global system, in other words, how power in the global order is configured, is imposed on a country. All right, it comes from the outside going in. Or you could have a leader like a Nehru or whoever who takes up this non-alignment mantle as his or her personal political project, but it's always something imposed from the out on the society. Okay, what I'm interested in is to see, okay, but what's the domestic response about this idea of non-alignment? How do people feel about, following a non-aligned position? And I operationalize this in terms of the concept of civil society. And for the purposes of this talk, I would like to include big business, capital, whatever you want to call it, as part of civil society. Some people tend to see big business as separate from civil society. I don't. I see it's part of civil society. And just for those people not maybe familiar with the concept of civil society, it simply refers to all organizations, groups in society. It can be student movements, it could be labor, it could be farmers' unions, it could be churches, whatever, okay? And so this is what I'm interested in, is this link between the domestic dimension and non-alignment. And this is where my two case studies come in. So my kind of broad research question is, to what extent does the idea of being non-aligned find resonance amongst domestic stakeholders? And I've got two little case studies. I had to really cut down on the detail because I knew the time's not going to be with me. But the first one is a project I started working on last year, is on Brazil's response to the United States' attempt to ban Huawei globally. That's the first one. And the second one is, of course, South Africa's response to the Ukraine war. And the point I want to show with both of these is that the political leaders in both the Brazilian case and in South African case tended to tilt too much to either side. What I'm going to try and show you with the case of Huawei, Bolsonaro was very fond of showing his alliances with Trump, but he paid a price for it, okay, because it leaned too much towards Washington. South Africa was the opposite, okay? South Africa wanted to eventually tilted too much towards Russia and eventually tilted a little bit back, and partly because of civil society response about it, which is what I want to try and illustrate to you. So let's start with the one that most people here in the room know probably the least about, which is the Brazilian case. So I thought to myself, what do I quickly tell people who know nothing about Brazil so they can just kind of zoom in on the story? And I thought, let me put on an overhead that basically compares what happened in the United States and in Brazil. And there you can see the scary mirror image of the extent to which Brazil, under Bolsonaro, very much copied a lot of what happened in Trump's US. Okay, so same thing happened Washington, January 6th, when Lula won by 1%. I was awake until 2 in the morning, and I was about to kind of make peace with another term of Bolsonaro. Came through. He won by 1%. And not a week later, they also stormed Congress and did exactly the same story. So now, if you know that kind of background, we can go back a little bit and go to when Bolsonaro was president. So, who voted for Bolsonaro when he came to power? There's this great book by Richard Lapper, and everybody's using these terms. The beef, the Bible, and the bullets. So those are the big constituencies that voted for Bolsonaro. Who's the beef? The beef is the enormous agribusiness industry, the guys who are also supporting deforestation, and they have massive power in Congress because of their hold on Brazil's agriculture industry. The second, the Bible, strong evangelical support, especially evangelical support for Bolsonaro. And in third, the bullets, the military, and two sets of people, especially, support the kind of military option. When I was in Brazil the last time, one of my colleagues told me that when Bolsonaro was president, he had nearly as many people in his government as Brazil had under the military dictatorship in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So powerful was the military under Bolsonaro. And the other group of people who were attracted to Bolsonaro's promises of dealing with the crime in Brazil. So there was this, they saw him as, we've got this perfect word in Afrikaans, kragdadigheid. He was seen as this guy who's powerful, who can deal with crime. So these were the support groups that brought Bolsonaro to power. And that's important because I'm going to come back to these in a moment. One part of this political narrative that Bolsonaro followed was a very anti-Chinese position. Okay, so I've got a picture there. Two guys that were particularly bad on Chinese relations. Is his son Eduardo and then the foreign minister Araujo. To give you an example how anti-Chinese these sentiments were, this is not a case of reading between the lines. These were blatant anti-Chinese sentiments, okay? So, for example, Eduardo Bolsonaro once accused China directly of causing the COVID pandemic, okay? Things got so bad at one stage that the leader of the House of Deputies in Brazil actually had to issue public statements to apologize for the kind of statements that were coming on, because relations with China, this is the Chinese ambassador in Brasilia at the time, were really fraying at the edges, okay? So amidst all of this, the Americans decide they want to ban Huawei, okay? And they're concerned about Huawei and the fact that because of its Chinese ties, that this opens the door for China to listen in on everything everybody in the world's doing, okay? And particularly 5G. So the fear of 5G was what drove all of this, okay? So they succeed largely in America's close allies, but in the global south it was much more difficult to get people to ban Huawei. So this is what then the complexity what happened in the Brazil case. Sorry, where's this one? Oh, okay. I don't know if I showed this one before. Okay. So there's a picture of Bolsonaro visiting Trump, very famous picture where he gave him the soccer T-shirt. And Trump basically said to him, if you guys don't ban Huawei, we are going to stop funding a big space station that they have in the north, Alcatel space station. They're not going to share intelligence anymore. And they made a whole number of threats. But Bolsonaro and those close to him were in any case happy to accede to the American demands because ideologically they wanted to prove that they're connected to Washington. Okay, they didn't even really need to make those threats. Okay, so this was a way for the Bolsonaristas to prove their ideological affinity and connection with the Trump administration in Washington. But there was a problem in all of this. Okay, so they agree they want to ban Huawei, but guess what? The political aspiration does not match the economic reality because Brazil's biggest trading partner no longer was the US, it was China, okay? And and Brazil was the 9th most important location of foreign direct investment for China. Brazil is the 9th largest, okay? The other problem, another very practical problem, is how dominant Huawei had become in Brazilian society. You can see there, it's a list of all the like we have Cell C and MTN and all those. You can see how dominant Huawei has been. Huawei had been so entrenched in Brazilian political economy. For example, there's a state in the north of Brazil, Goiás, with huge tracts of farmlands, farms that are as big as small European countries, okay? The farmers in those areas have started to experiment using 5G to maximize grain yields, to fertilizer, everything with 5G, and now they were expected to simply uproot and take all the Huawei out, okay? So this caused a storm amongst, firstly, the CEOs of the telecom companies, okay? They firstly refused. They said, we will take the Brazilian government to court. You will compensate us for all of this. And it was a mess. Okay? They refused at one stage to meet American visiting Secretary of State. And when that also didn't work, Washington even promised that they would get Washington even promised to make Brazil a member of NATO if they were prepared to ban Huawei. Okay. It still didn't work. Okay. Number one, public opinion was very much against it. The newspapers were against it. And Brazilians as a whole took all of this with a bit of salt. Because just a few years ago, when Dilma Rousseff was the president of Brazil, they discovered that her phone had been bugged, not by the Chinese, but by the Americans. Okay. So this was all taken with quite a bit of salt. And so the other reason why the Huawei ban never took off in Brazil is because of those support coalitions that I mentioned. Remember the bullets, the beef, and the other one, the Bible. And it was especially the agribusiness, the powerful agribusiness lobby, that did not want to risk trade ties with China by banning Huawei. And so we see tensions within the ruling coalition of Bolsonaro. On the one hand, you've got the very old ideologues, his son Eduardo, the foreign minister, and then the pragmatists, people like Helena Cristina, who was Minister of Agriculture. Okay, they really got pushback from their constituents saying, we're not going to lose those massive soybeans and other exports simply to ban Huawei, and we're not even sure if it's going to work. Okay, but the tensions in the Bolsonaro camp were so bad that Bolsonaro instructed his Vice-President Moral there at the end. He was openly against it. He openly went against government policy. And Bolsonaro said, only I and the Minister of Telecommunications can make any statements about Huawei. That's how bad the frictions were. So it was dominance of Huawei. Secondly, the differences within the ruling coalition, and then finally COVID itself that prevented the Huawei ban from taking effect. Because at one stage, you might remember how high the infections were in Brazil. It was the fifth highest numbers of fatalities because of COVID. Bolsonaro, who was kind of a COVID denialist, struggled to find vaccines. Eventually, out of desperation, agreed to get vaccines from China. the Chinese sent a message via Huawei, by the way. The Chinese it worked that way because what happened is the Brazilian Minister of Technology sent a note via Huawei for vaccines. And it came back, and Beijing said, we're happy to help with vaccines, provided you stop the restrictions on Huawei. So the Huawei ban came to an end, and that was. So you can see the pushback from civil society, especially the corporate sector. Okay, so that's the first case study. Second one, you're all probably much more familiar with, and this was South Africa's position against Ukraine. This is my favorite Supreme cartoon during that time, so I had to put it in here somewhere. What I loved about this cartoon, it very much reflected South African society's sense of how the South African government was responding to the crisis in Russia. And my sense of the time was that people were not upset with the idea that we are neutral or non-aligned, but it was the fact that the actions did not match what was stated. And so I'm not going to go through all of them, but I just put down a number of them. I think the one that got everybody's skin crawling was when we had the joint naval exercises with Russia, the same week that the invasion was 1 year ago. And then, of course, part of this I didn't even list. It was the whole debacle with Brigadier when he accused that we would be giving weapons to Russia and so on. So what I wanted to quickly mention here is just how civil society in South Africa pushed back against this perception of tilting too much. So I've listed a couple of headlines. And to me, one of the most interesting ones was Hendrik de Tooy, the CEO of 91, who said, staying neutral is one thing, but appearing to support Russia while claiming neutrality is dangerous. Okay, and you see constant complaints by South African business, by the business sector, about all of this. But it wasn't only the business sector. For example, the South African Catholic Bishops Conference also condemned South Africa's position on this. The Tutu Foundation said, if having naval exercises with Russia and China is the price we pay for being a member of BRICS, the price is too high. So very, very strong opposition. Even AfriForum complained about it. So across the board, there was resistance against how South Africa tilted too much towards Russia. What was very interesting was the response from the Reserve Bank. Okay, so note this is May 2023. So I'm not going to go read through all of those, but this is the Financial Bank Stability Review. Most important, I put there in red. He says, and as you know, the Reserve Bank doesn't take political positions. By exception, they might, and this is one of them. It says, that in a nutshell is the risk the government is taking with a neutral stance that most commentators regard as pro-Russia. And then very important, should this risk materialize, the South African financial system will not be able to function as it's unable to make international payments in US dollars. So we would have been completely cut off from the global financial system if the United States would decide to impose and cut us out of our SWIFT position. Now, we had the unfortunate position, and this, of course, was a very difficult position the government was in, of do we allow Putin to attend the BRICS summit or not? Are we going to arrest him or not? Okay. So Pretoria really was caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. And I think a lot of people sighed a great sigh of relief when they heard that only Sergei Lavrov is coming and that Putin will participate through a video conference. So that immediately changed the options. Super important. But what's interesting here is also public opinion about the war in Ukraine. So Ipsos did this great study in June 2023, and I originally had 5 slides, and I said, no, it's too much to cut them down to 2. So if you want to go and get the rest of it, there's like super juicy stuff in this opinion poll. I'm just going to show you 3 of them. They did about 5 African countries, including South Africa. And if you see there, it is in Africa's interest to sit on the fence, sit many. And then what's interesting here, well, anyway. Oh, that's the point. Is look at South Africa. The one I'm interested in here is the solution is somewhere between the 2 choices, right? This is the non-aligned, not taking a stance position. South Africa, 59%. There's not huge support for Russia here. Maybe even a little bit more for Ukraine. And broadly similar to other countries. The next one I thought here was my own government should care about Russia's occupation, withdrawal forces. Here's Russia's invasion of Ukraine is against principles of international law. Again, 56% of South Africans agree. Okay, it's not. And then the third one, the case for Russia, some qualified support. What's interesting here is probably, for historic reason, it makes sense for my country to support Russia. This one we think would be very divided. Very divided. There's not this 60% support. It's very divided amongst South Africans. So what happens then? And this is interesting. 1 month later, we are told that there's a peace mission. Okay. The Financial Bank Stability Review was in May. The peace mission was in June. Okay. And very suddenly, Ramaphosa says, now I wonder who wrote this. Okay. Concerns were raised about our commitment to our non-aligned position. Sure, that is like, okay. Clearly shifting back. And now wanting to show the world, particularly the West, okay, no, we're not really that pro-Russia. We want to come back to the center. So what explains the pushback from civil society in these 2 cases? What explains? I want to put 3 reasons on the board. The one is the distribution of trade, okay? So my 2 great heroes who I also have to get into the inaugural lecture somehow, Robert Cox and Susan Strange, they would say, they would say, boys, this is obvious. It's the structural power of the global economy simply reflected through South African and Brazilian capital. There's no surprise, okay? So I agree. It explains much of the story, okay? So true. Let me just quickly give you some trade data. And unfortunately, I was very disappointed when I went to this WITS data bank, the World Bank's WITS data bank. And the latest data is 2021. I was hoping 2023 is there. But just look at the export partners. Brazil exports 31% of everything to China. The USA 11%. South Africa exports 11 to China, the USA 10, and then if we add up all the rest, it's all towards the West, okay? And then what's really interesting is look at Russia. Not even 1% of our trade goes to Russia. The mind boggles. So the structural power of global capital, it is one part of the story, but I think that doesn't explain everything. I think there's 2 other parts as well. The one is around identity and how you see your position in the world. And here I want to highlight the 2 countries' historic roles as mediators. Okay, both Brazil and South Africa have long established traditions of trying to mediate international conflicts. The ones in red, I don't know if you can see them, they're not so clear there, are more international ones. So as regional powers, they're obviously involved in a lot of conflict resolution. You can see there, South Africa, I even list all of them. But they've got a long history of trying to be mediators, of trying to be bridges. And 2, especially on the South African side, I quickly want to mention, because I think these are very interesting in this times that we're doing is the first is in 2000, South Africa was involved in the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. Ramaphosa and Martti Ahtisaari in Finland were actually part of the disarmament committee, and they were partly part of the success of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. And the other one, 2002, the Spear Initiative. And if you had known or heard about the Spear Initiative, this was when South Africa tried, just down the road here at Spear, to host an informal discussions, negotiations between Israel and Palestine. Eventually, nothing came of it. But I came upon a really interesting paper the other day about why South Africa has taken a much more hardcore position on Israel. But initially, South Africa did try to be much of a mediator role in Israel. And there's a ton of them. So there's also a kind of a history of being a mediator. And what I'm wondering is there a political culture in South Africa and Brazil that maybe somehow supports these countries being bridges, being mediators, and maybe you can link it back to our domestic political histories as well. And then finally, the third reason that I think could explain civil society pushback are public opinion surveys. Now there's a bunch of them, and I decided I'll just take 2 or 3 that have some nice visuals to show you. So the first one is a Pew Research Center survey, was done in October last year, 2023. And I just took one slide, and I hope you can all see there. What it asks there is, what favorable views, do you have more favorable views of the US or of China? And so China's on that side, the US is on that side, and you can see South Africa is very much here, again, very much here in the middle. It's not too pro-China. You can see the Brazilians are a tiny little bit closer to the US. But you can see the other one, so this is public opinion, okay? And then they did one, where's my notes? Between January and May, they did this poll. It's also Pew in the US. It's a little bit small still, although I tried to enlarge it. But if you have a look at how people in high and middle incomes view the US and China, okay? You can clearly see they're more high-income countries are more pro-US. But if we come down here to middle-income countries, and you look at the South Africa one, South Africans, 49, percentage who have a favorable opinion of. South Africa, 49, China. Again, it's very much in between. We're also close to, well, India is a little bit more pro, but then again, Brazil a little bit more. But again, you see this kind of being in between, neither too much to either side. And then a third quick slide I just quickly wanted to show you. And this report came out in April of this year. This is not public opinion data. This is foreign policy experts, people in think tanks, academics, and so on. These are they asked thousands of these foreign policy experts in 4 countries, South Africa, India, Brazil, and Germany. And here's some very interesting parallels. If you see, for example, and the question here is, how should your country position itself in a growing US-China rivalry? And we see that on the 82% of respondents in Brazil say, no, we must be neutral, okay? 79 in South Africa, also neutral. India, much less so, but also Germany, doesn't surprise me at all. Germany much more pro the US side for very obvious reasons. Okay. But you can again see this position of wanting to be in the middle. Okay. So nearly the end, the conclusion. So what do we see from these cases? We see that if the economic interests and the political interests are too far apart, you're going to have problems. So in the Brazilian case, the Bolsonaristas, they tilted too much towards Trump on the US side, but because they were, held back by the economic links. South Africa, the opposite. South Africa, very close links with UK, with Europe, US. And there's a very great quote, if I could find it here, that Peter Bruce, the old editor of the Business Day, he had this great little quote. He said, South Africa has its heart in the East and its wallet in the West. and shows you this kind of complexity and the difficulty of tilting either way. Right, so the dessert. What are the implications for foreign policy? I'm going to try and do this very quickly. I don't know how's my... JD hasn't shown me any signs that I'm still good. Okay. So, implications for foreign policy. Firstly, I quickly want to mention 10 years ago, now nearly 10 years ago, Karen Smith and I, we were fortunate enough to get R1 million, something from the Open Society Foundation, to do an opinion poll on how South Africans see foreign policy. As far as I know, there hasn't been another study done yet, but one of the most interesting things we found with our survey was that it doesn't matter, for example, we asked a question in our survey, what's the purpose of South Africa's foreign policy? What should its purpose be? And it doesn't matter if you looked at the level of education, level of income, whether people lived in Mamelodi or Sandton or Langa or Bishop's Court, the consistent response all the time was the purpose of South Africa's foreign policy should be to create the economy and create jobs. You got this consistently. The second question we asked them, should South Africa trade with any country, even those countries that abuse a country's human rights? Surprisingly, 51% people said yes. We should trade with whoever. So we read that, a very strong endorsement that South Africa should really pursue its own economic interests first. But it doesn't mean South Africans are not interested in what happens in other countries. We also had a question, we asked them, should South Africa be a peace broker in Africa? 66% of respondents said South Africa should help to end conflicts. And I don't have to mention, as all of you know, the concern that the issue of Gaza and Palestine has triggered in this country and also on this campus. So people are concerned about it. The issue here is directing your foreign policy, signaling your non-alignment, but not doing it in a piecemeal ad hoc or from time to time when it serves party political interests. It must be consistent. The problem, I think, with Ukraine was that South Africa lost a huge amount of credibility, and many people will now, look back at the idea of non-alignment because so much credibility was lost during that time. Second thing I quickly wanted to mention is the importance of India, Brazil, and South Africa as collaborative partners. I was lucky in 2012 to be invited to a 4-day workshop in Sussex near Brighton, and we were a bunch of academics and social activists and all of that. And throughout the 4 days, one of the things that struck me when we were at this workshop was that whenever there's a lunch or there's going out for drinks after the conference, the South Africans, the Brazilians, and the Indians are always together. And there's a natural affinity for these three people to come together. And my concern with the BRICS is that we have very few democracies in there. And we should have a closer collaboration we need to have a little democratic hub within BRICS, because the way it's going is not good. As you know, Indonesia pulled out, Argentina pulled out, and let's see who will join at the next one. And then finally, I hope that if our government of national unity sticks together, they will use the opportunity when we host the G2020, which, by the way, is going to cost us 77 million, apparently. So we better make the most of that money. And hopefully, when we do host the G20 next year, South Africa can use that as a platform to readjust and re-signal its position as a kind of global state that wants to pursue a non-aligned position. Thank you for your patience.
Good evening, Professor Ramjagannath. Good evening, Professor Rood, colleagues, friends, I've been asked, or I've been invited by Janis to act as respondent to his lecture. It's not an easy task. Firstly, because I've been told by Jonathan Dale, he's the coordinator of this evening, that this doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't happen a lot that after an inaugural lecture somebody acts as a respondent, so he told me the pressure is on you. And then also secondly, Janis gave an excellent lecture. You can see why he's one of the favorite lecturers in the political science department. So I'm here with many caveats that I can't be as suave and as entertaining as Janis. But I want to start off with congratulating Professor van der Westhuizen, Janis, with really an excellent and a thought-provoking lecture, and really engagingly delivered as we are really accustomed to your work. But then I also want to congratulate Janis for what this evening is all about. Tonight is a celebration of a professional and a personal milestone for Janis. It's a significant moment, let us not forget that, a significant moment in Janis's career path as a researcher, as a theorist of note, and also as a scholar. And Janis mentioned that he's been here for 32 years. I also have been here for almost as long as a student in this department, and now as one of the lecturers. And I've had the privilege to work with Janis as a colleague. We work in the same field of comparative political economy, foreign policy, and development in the global south. We've often co-published. We've sometimes tried to co-author. It hasn't always worked out. And we move in the same epistemic circles and in the same networks. And when I was reflecting on what I'm going to say during this response, I thought, well, how would you characterize Janis's scholarship? So what is it that you could say that Janis has contributed to the various fields that I have mentioned? And the one thing that has always stood out to me as far as Janis' work is concerned is the quality and the value of his scholarship. Janis engages in scholarship not for the sake of scholarship, but actually always aspires to produce meaningful scholarship. So scholarship that actually has actual impact and positive impact on the world. And the hallmark of good scholarship is that it is incisive, it is probing, it's theoretically advancing, and always provocative. And all of those attributes are always found in Janis's work. He doesn't only peruse, document, or record what a lot of foreign policy study these days often is about. He always does what he does at the hand of new concepts, new angles, new theoretical insights, and so on. And I think we saw a demonstration of that in his lecture tonight about global swing states, which is something that I learned a lot about. He's also a committed constructivist. That didn't come through very much maybe in tonight's lecture, but that's why I have a question about that. But as constructivist, he never takes things at face value, especially governments and government policies, and especially South African government policy. So let me, I've got 5 minutes, I know Jonathan Dale told me. Let me just reflect on a few aspects of Janis's lecture. And I do that through the prism of foreign policy, because that that is the cognitive fields that Janis and I work on, and it maybe wasn't so strongly articulated in his presentation, but effectively his analysis, his discussion was about state-civil society relations within the context of foreign policy. So, and I actually read the text that the paper that the presentation is based on. I first want to say that I find one good, a very important innovation in the discussion, and that is your consideration of how the systemic and the domestic mesh in terms of influencing elite policy making, especially in the foreign policy environment. And this in a context of geopolitics, where geopolitics is both causal as well as fluid. So that for me is really a very interesting angle that you've taken by trying to understand what is the influence of the domestic environment on state policy and foreign policy choices, but especially within the given geopolitical order that we have. Then I've said that, so your interest is about state-civil society relations in state foreign policy making. Now, one law that exists in foreign policy analysis is that foreign policy is the preserve of elites. So yes, so thinking then about, what's the role or the influence of domestic stakeholders is useful and provocative in a number of and generative, theoretically generative in a number of ways. But I wonder about two things in this regard. The one is about dialecticism. So, how the morphology of power works between the policy elite and the domestic populace, and under what conditions civil society can, with success or effectively, influence foreign policy choices, or as you've been arguing, sometimes even swing elite choices and foreign policy. How is this configured? You've mentioned about political culture and there being maybe some elements in Brazil and South Africa's political culture that could be explanations for this, but is it configured differently in two cases, and with what theoretical implication is that? Secondly, what's the material but also the discursive sources that the domestic stakeholders within the domestic environment can access or can capitalize on in trying to influence elite foreign policy? So as a constructivist, what would you say are the discursive processes through which civil society within a very elitist context, a policy context of foreign policy making, can actually have influence? And, it would be interesting in your further writing on this topic to think about this, especially in the case of South Africa, where, yes, so what you've shown to us is that certain civil society entities that have material resources are effective, taking the government to court, for example, on foreign policy issues, but what other discursive resources are also at play for such actors? And then lastly, so your conclusion, the three concluding points for me are very, very interesting, because they question the kind of way in which South Africa has played this active non-alignment policy. But I wonder if there hasn't been any strategic gain for South Africa to follow this ad hoc, inconsistent policy, right? So sort of always being fluid in its policy statements or positions, shifting between different external powers or major powers. Is there some strategic benefit for that from South Africa's policymakers? And I wonder if you are maybe a little bit too optimistic about the Government of National Unity being a potential pivoting point or potential a change for a more sort of consistent expression and implementation of South Africa's foreign policy, especially with our new foreign minister who's really a dark horse. I think we don't know much about him. So yes, I will end off again with thanking you and congratulating you for this evening. I enjoyed reading your paper. I enjoyed the presentation as I saw all of the persons here, and it's been really a heartening 30 years of collegiality. I look forward to the next 30 years.
Professor van der Westhuizen, thank you very much for your lecture. Good evening to the van der Westhuizen family and friends. Professor Vasti Roert, Vice Dean for Learning and Teaching of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. Professor Nicola de Jager, the Chair of Political Sciences. Professor Scarlett Cornelissen, who gave the response to our university leadership presence, leadership of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute privilege and pleasure to be with you tonight and to be part of and to share in this inaugural lecture, which is effectively the introduction of Professor van der Westhuizen and his academic scholarship and interests to the academic community at Stellenbosch University, but also to the larger community in our town. The inaugural lecture is typically a rite of passage event within a university and marks the recognition of a colleague that has been promoted or appointed and enters the rank of full professor. In the case of Professor van der Westhuizen, it is a recognition of him being bestowed with the rank of full professor. Although I saw in his bio sketch, it took place in 2021. So we've had a little bit of a delay in terms of you having your inaugural lecture, but it's expected in terms of the challenges that we faced over the last few years with some of these pandemics that were around. So this event affords the opportunity to Professor van der Westhuizen to share with us his innovative ideas, his discoveries, and his deep insights with regards to his discipline focus and his academic scholarship and interest. He also at the start shared a little bit about his academic journey, and I also learned that he and I were at the same institution at one point in time at the University of Natal. I think he was in the early 2000s at the University of Natal, and I had started my academic career at that institution in the mid-90s. So thank you very much, Janis, for your lecture on the world is bigger than five, the global state and the changing global order. And thank you for the political menu that you delivered this evening. I have to say that you have given me new insights into the concept of swing states and about non-alignment and about the impact on global politics. It was a thought-provoking lecture, and my background is I'm an engineer, so me as a mere engineer, I was able to understand what you were saying and get some clarity on the changing global order that we have and we have been experiencing, especially in South Africa, as you pointed out, giving the examples. And I think it's taken place over the last few decades, as you've given by the examples. Now, one of the indicators of a good inaugural lecture is the ability of a professor to share deep and complex disciplinary knowledge in a manner that is both understandable and thought-provoking. Not just to a general audience, but also clearly articulates the novelty and the complexity of the work to disciplinary experts. Now, this is an incredible balancing act that you have to undertake when you profess during an inaugural lecture. And I have to say you've done that impeccably well tonight. So this is the art of a true professor, a real philosopher being able to get that balance right. So congratulations, Professor van der Westhuizen, on your body of research and work on swing states and the changing global order. Your work does not simply add to academic knowledge, it truly adds to the understanding of the global political discourse that we face at the moment. We at Stellenbosch University are proud of your work and proud of your achievements, and really look forward to you doing more in that regard and add to the vision of this institution. And that's really about the impact that we have as an institution on society. So congratulations once again, and well done on your inaugural lecture. I'd like to call you up for you to receive the scroll.
Good evening, Professor Ramjuganov, Professor Roos, Professor van der Westhuizen, Janis, Professor Cornelissen, family, friends, colleagues. It has been left to me to add the bookend to this evening's celebration and acknowledgement of academic achievement. Professor Janis van der Westhuizen, Janis, congratulations. Becoming full professor is hard-earned and the culmination, as we heard, of a 30-plus year journey of research, writing, publishing, networking, teaching, supervision, as well as navigating the endless administration distractions. As we have heard, Janis is a much-enjoyed lecturer as he has chosen his topics well. They are interesting, and he always brings a good dose of humor into his work, as we see tonight. Thank you, Janis, for the feast of your research and your ideas, and we look forward to more feasting. Thank you. Then on behalf of Janis, I would like to thank those who have made this event possible, a fittingly auspicious occasion, a good reminder of what the academic project is about. To the Rectorate, represented by Professor Daresh Ramjuganov, to the Deanery of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, represented by Professor Vasti Root, as well as to your officers, extend our thanks from Janis as well as from the department. Thank you for supporting this event. Thank you for being here. Then to the inaugural lecture working group, and I think I saw Jonathan Dale leave. Jonathan Dale Blankenberg, you will receive the emails. He's been the key coordinator behind this event, so thank you to him. Thank you to his team. Thank you to the team. Janis can testify to this with all the emails and the requests, and the communication team, the marketing team, the catering team, the sound team, the lighting team, the photography team, and the library. Thank you very much to each of you and for what you have done towards making this an excellent evening and putting it together with such excellence. Thank you. Friends, family, and colleagues, thank you for your support of Janis. Also being here, whether in person, to those of you who are also online, thank you. And thus ends the official part of the evening, and I get to invite you to another feast, this time of food and wine in the library staff room. So let me quickly direct you. I don't know where it is, but I know those who do. So we're going to proceed either up the stairs or the ramp, and then if we can please meet at the inquiries desk, and then we will be directed, including me, to where the library staff room is for our food and drinks. And if I could please ask you to all rise while the academic procession leaves.